it's just kind of like, the people who go, yeah, my account was hacked and that's why the dick pic was sent.
Yes, it is exactly that.
All right, Medica, you ready to do this? Welcome to Startup 360. Budjikamarwara from the Gadigal lands here in Sydney. I'm Simon Thomsen.
And I'm Kayla Medica.
Great to have you along. Swannies won on the weekend. That was so good. Just at the last minute.
I've got to call you out though because I've noticed one of your swan stickers has disappeared from your laptop.
Yes, but I've been finding room for other stickers. I've started to put my collection together. Like, inspired by my teenage daughter, who used to have her laptop, or still does, have it covered in stickers, I thought, I'm going to do this. Take me back to my teenage years when we didn't have laptops. We were all writing with papyrus and ink back then. And so that's what I'm doing. Lots to talk about today. A couple of amazing guests. Let's get straight to talking about who we've got on the show.
So today we've got Mick Liubinskas, the CEO of Climate Salad, and we also have Julie Trell, who is the founder and chief play officer of Playful Purpose.
And going back 100 years to when we were all little baby startup people.
Where are we going with this?
They were both at Murudi, which was, so there's a link and there are moments. You're going to find out there's a little bit of history. I've known these guys for a long time. And their paths have crossed in this wonderful, weavy way over the years. So I didn't plan it this cleverly, but when I realised what I'd done, I thought, shit, I'm clever.
Whenever you're in startups for long enough, you'll find many of these. It's a very small ecosystem.
It is one of those party things. Speaking of which, you've written Party 101 on the board.
Yes.
What is that about?
So as I was researching our guests and picking out my questions for them, I saw a bit of a party trend, which we'll get to when we see the guests come out. And so I thought,
have you seen us at South Start?
What happens at South Start stays at South Start?
Absolutely. We know how to party there.
And so I thought I'd make today's theme party. So I've got to ask you, what is your number one tip for throwing a good party?
Bring the fried shit out sort of around about 10 o'clock because by then everyone is well and truly over 0.05 and sort of the greasy stuff will come in quite handy.
Okay, are you Uber Eatsing or are you frying?
Right, well, even if it's just sausage rolls
One
and
drink
party
in hand,
pies.
Tongs in the other.
You can do sausages on the barbie and then throw them in the oven and keep them warm. I wouldn't suggest getting out a deep fryer at that point, although everyone's into air fryers now, so you could do that sort of thing. But then probably the best trick is to cater. So you just get caterers and it's not your problem, it's theirs. And they come out with little cones of chips and
chips.
But even chips at that point would be good. But
everybody loves chips.
Or arancini balls.
Yeah, cheesy.
Really great. Yeah, all of those moments. So bring the heavier stuff, or even just a little stew with couscous or whatever you want to do, or rice.
Sounds like a very gourmet party.
It's me, of course it is.
You need to invite me to a party.
I will.
And feed me.
I promise. We're going to do all of that. I'll do it next month, all right?
Okay.
You got a deal. Hold you to that, and then you can review it on Startup 360. Before we get any further, though, I do want to say that Startup 360 is supported by Vanta, helping startups unlock market opportunities through automated compliance. Thank you to Vanta. Right, budget night. Shall we talk about it?
Best night of the year.
Well, it's Christmas for economists, certainly, and budget paper number 2 is always full of fun. I have to say, I used to get handed massive wads of paper. Nowadays, it's kind of cool because you download a PDF and then you can search through it for keywords.
Yeah.
So did that. Startup got mentioned once in something. I think entrepreneurship got mentioned once. Innovation got mentioned, I think 7 times in budget paper number 1 because it was referencing a program they'd already done. Once in the budget paper number 2, which is the money and explaining what's going on. But aside from that, there was really sweet FA in it, which I think is the term I used in one of my stories. A little bit better than last year where there was zip, zero, nada, but still incredibly disappointing going into an election that supposedly for a government who is mad keen on innovation and mad keen on the future, really we're still stuck in mining and sort of hydrogen and whatever and gas rebates and all of those sorts of things. And I think the really big concern is that, whilst we're going to get a tax cut in 2026,
2026 still seems like a long way off.
Look, it's neither here nor there in that respect. And, and if the RBA cuts interest rates by a 0.25%, everyone's going to basically get the same thing as a tax cut if the banks pass it on as that. That's the impact we're talking about. But by the same token, AI, which I think is probably the big issue everyone's talking about and thinking about from that perspective, and jobs, and they're trying to do all sorts of things around jobs. If we're not thinking about how AI is going to impact on the Australian economy and on employment and what's going to happen to people, especially in lower skilled jobs that can be automated through AI, then we are completely dropping the ball from a government planning perspective. And I didn't see any of that. Plenty of people in the startup sector were calling for it. Nothing.
It's interesting. I read a piece literally yesterday that was about, is the knowledge economy over? And are we moving into the next thing, which we just don't know what it is yet because it hasn't happened. But AI is definitely changing how we work. There is the joke within marketing circles of AI will never take, let's say, a designer's job because then the client would have to know how to brief, which they don't. And they're terrible explaining what they want.
Most people know what they don't want. They don't actually know what they want.
Yeah, they have these lofty ideas of what they want. But yeah, having an intention when you're doing work instead of just being well, spit me out a marketing website is okay, but what does the website actually need to say? You need to make that decision first before you write the copy, before you tell the AI to write the copy. But a lot of people don't actually sit down and think, what is it that I want to convey? They just want flashy, shiny, attention grabbing.
Oh my gosh!
Which AI is actually really good at.
What was Flash? That was the thing, wasn't it, on websites? Remember when Flash was what everyone wanted on a website to make it all look bright and shiny and sparkly? Look, we'll move on from the budget because I think the thing that everyone's talking about this week is, the death of satire in the US with the current government and that Signal conversation. I mean, they might as well just have a private Facebook group to do this stuff because...
Well, Mark would love that.
Yeah.
It would be great for the Facebook stocks.
Yeah, or just DM everyone on X and then Elon would be happy. But I'm absolutely gobsmacked by this, and I kind of get that, as someone said there, they are basically a whole bunch of Fox News presenters cosplaying as government officials.
Well, I'm surprised, but I'm not surprised at the same time, because if you think back to when TikTok was in the Senate and was getting grilled and they were asking the most ridiculous questions like, is TikTok in my Wi-Fi? It's you clearly don't understand how technology and the internet works. And so to find out that there's a group of very powerful officials in a Signal chat talking absolute shit is not surprising to me.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with having a conversation talking absolute shit. It's they do carry on like a bunch of frat boys trying to organise a beer night. But it's when it gets to that level of, we're going to bomb the hell out of the Houthis in Yemen. Malcolm Turnbull, a decade ago when he was PM, was a mad chatter on Signal and various other apps. So I don't think any of this is extraordinary. And politicians do it all the time. And of course, it's kind of like, the I am version of burner discussions. You don't kind of necessarily want any of this going public. And I don't have a problem with that, if they want to do that. But when you are sharing the details of a major military operation in a non-secure environment, to me, that is criminal.
I don't think they know what a secure environment is and what a secure environment isn't.
Yeah.
They just think, everything I do is protected because I'm official personnel or whatever. They're not. The brain cells are not hitting each other.
It's just kind of like, the people who go, my account was hacked and that's why the dick pic was sent.
Yes, it is exactly that.
Let's meet our first guest, Mick Liubinskas. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the show, and welcome to our first guest, Mick Liubinskas, CEO of Climate Salad.
Hey, how you going?
That was a very peppy.
Or as I remember him, a long, long time ago, the godfather of Australian startups. I remember that headline when you took off to the US.
I was way too young to be called the godfather, but and also, there were actually generations of people before me, but
Mick.
That speaks to how young our industry actually is. So yeah, let's get into it.
We should get into it. So our theme for this episode is parties.
Yeah.
And you actually inspired my theme because I was thinking about Climate Salad and how Climate Salad just throws so many events.
Yeah.
And so surely you must have a good tip for an engaging event, whether that's work or play.
I might explain the irony of that after the show, and Julie, who's your guest coming up, can attest to it. But for me, a party is all about the people. Like, you can have a party anywhere. 20 years ago, I had New Year's Eve in a national park in Tanzania, and we did an alcohol run at 11:30 at night and came back with alcohol. So I think it's with good people who believe in what they're doing. They can be anywhere in the world. So
have a mission.
Good to know. Yeah, he's always been mission inspired. I love that.
Have been mission inspired. Exactly.
20 years ago in Tanzania, 11:30.
Yeah.
So you couldn't do that in Sydney?
You can't even get alcohol at 11:30 in Sydney.
That's true. Yeah.
All of his bags were full of goons, so he sort of actually packed those. And
That's
took them with
right.
him, I'm
Did you
sure.
pack a Hills hoist as well to play Goon of Fortune?
That would be great. Portable Hills hoist. I love the idea.
I'm going to shorten that time frame from 20 years to 2008.
Yeah.
Pollinizer. When it all
Pollinizer.
kicked off, because it kind of feels like that for you was the starting point into the Australian startup ecosystem. Take us back to that time and paint a picture of what startup life in Sydney and Australia more broadly was like back then.
Well, I mean, right back to 2005, actually, 20 years ago. I just come back from international travel and
Tanzania.
Straight off the
was working on a
party.
Yeah, was working on a startup, and we had a startup dinner in Sydney, and we tried to get 20 people, and we could only get 12. And Mike Cannon-Brooks was there. It was I think 11 dudes and one woman, so it was still poorly diverse back in the day. And there was a lot of people doing a lot of good work, but it was still actually, and had people been around for a long time, Alan Buckridge, Terry Hillsberg, and Neil Miller and others who had been building tech for a long time. But it was really fragmented. A lot of the capital raising, we'd raised a lot of VC funds in 1998. They got wiped out by the dot-com crash. So in 2008, they all eventually closed down. There was Southern Cross Ventures.
Oh gosh, after the 10 years, yeah.
After the 10 years. So, but we'd started by Phil and I. He was working with a couple of startups. I was working with a couple of startups. Like, we were doing like $80 a day daily rates, and taking equity in companies, just because we just wanted to work in this space and help as many companies as we could. I think Phil did like a 14-day week once, and that's within his capacity to do that.
We're talking about Phil Moyle, who nowadays...
Phil Moyle
you'll
from
find
Main
it-
Sequence
Yeah.
Ventures, yeah. So Phil and I worked at Kazaa back in 2002, 2004. He was the CTO, I was the head of marketing and product. And then we eventually were working with startups from 2005, 2007. Those startups did not eventuate and go any further. So we just started helping multiple startups, and we ended up just referring so many customers to each other. We had a glass or bottle of wine and said we should create something just to be able to share startups. And he goes, I had this domain name a couple of years ago, Pollinizer. I was like, perfect, Pollinizer. We started Pollinizer with helping as many companies as we could. We took a lot of it, as much equity as we could, to try to build a portfolio. We had nothing to invest. I think it was $500 each to start it. And then a couple of years later, we started...
Huge. That would have been a Series C back then, $500.
Relatively, it was for us. And we were totally learning. Like, we had Eric Rees there, but as he was writing his book, he came to our garage in Surrey Hills.
Wow.
He was writing his book, and we had our startup focus book, and we were like comparing notes about the story. Like, he was literally writing it as he was going. So really well connected. We worked with a lot of like tech stars globally in London and others, and we were trying to work all this stuff out. And we were doing iteration because that's the only option we really had. And built up this portfolio. We raised a fund, $510,000, I think the fund was, with about 25 investors putting a little bit. And
you could have bought an entire Sydney suburb for about that back then.
We could. And one of the companies we had backed was Spreets, which was Dean McAvoy's second business, which we ended up selling about 13 months later to Yahoo. And that returned that whole fund, which was really good. And we raised another $5 million. We ended up doing about incubating 25 businesses. And a key differentiator, I think, is really important. An incubator is where you start a company and you own a considerable portion, like 30 to 80%, right? You are the company. Where an accelerator, you put little bits of money into lots of companies for minority stakes, the big benefit of that is the passion stays with it's all about supporting the founders rather than being the founders.
That's a good definition to have.
Yeah. I've raved on.
No, that was a great rave. Because then just struck me though that this has been your history, bringing people together, creating these communities, and so we came to Climate Salad. I'm going to jump forward 20 years.
Yep.
Tell us about that coming together and what drove you to that particular point.
So I'd moved to the US with Muridi,
I'm going to jump back to that bit. But
So I moved to the US with Muridi, and I just got there and actually I was massively disillusioned. It was like there were so many super wealthy, unhappy people. There was lots of technology, which I loved. Some really nice people as well. But as someone who was Mr. Focus, I was just not anywhere near as focused as I should have been over there. You had to be really specialised. But I was just like, oh, it felt dirty to me. Like, there was just so much about startups and so big, and I just felt like it wasn't a contribution I wanted to make. And then a certain person got elected and pulled out of the Paris Agreement, and I contacted my best friend in the world and said, who works in sustainable finance. I said, oh my goodness, this is no good. And he said, yeah, maybe it's time you got in the game. And I looked at my kids, read the IPCC report and said, oh my goodness, here's a big challenge I can go work on. And decided to commit sat down with my wife, we went for a walk, I remember, and saying, I think I'm going to focus the rest of my life on sustainability and clean tech. Because what's that? I said, I don't know. I have to go work it out. But it's, there was absolutely no point me working my butt off and providing my kids a $10 million trust fund and having the environment to be a pile of cinders. Like, it made no sense. It was like the best thing I could absolutely do for my kids and that whole generation and purpose and impact is to go and work on climate problems. Within
the realm of climate, like there's so many different aspects to it.
Yeah.
Which ones are you most passionate about?
I'm a old generalist, so I go really, really broad. I think about reducing emissions, removing emissions, adaptation resilience, and biodiversity in nature. And then you think about the jobs to be done, like from a product perspective, powering, growing, making, moving, and cooling. The 5 things you think about. So I'm really, really broad. And even broader than that, I went outside of software, which is a dangerous thing to do here in Australia. So I went outside of software into hardware, science, energy, and infrastructure. And the last one's a doozy. But you can't solve... I saw Olympia from GoTerra today, and when I went to her facility in Canberra and I got out of the car and went, whoa, like that's a visceral experience right down your nose. And she's like, Mick, you can't solve climate without getting your hands dirty. And she's right.
I have one more climate sort of related question before we go to Muridi. What do you do at home for, like, do you have a worm farm? Like, tell me about your home setup.
Yeah, and this was before I started working in climate. I thought I was a decent environmentalist, and it's good to be able, I think, at least as positive as you can be. I've got 2 worm farms. I bought them from an Australian startup, and I've got 3 kids, so we have lots of food waste, which is really good. I've got a veggie garden. Interestingly, I don't have an EV. So we bought a house which is 100 metres from a bus stop, and we've had our car for 5 years, and I think we've driven 32,000 kilometres, and that includes my parents driving to Cairns back. So we just don't drive the car very much. We've adopted that kind of life. My next car will absolutely be an EV, and this goes a bit to my post I did recently. That, like, it's okay to be a climate hypocrite. It's the only thing we can be at the moment. Like, there's no perfect way. I flew to South Start, but I really want to work in sustainable aviation fuel. We can do both those things at the same time. So
I am going to jump into that one because the context for that, for our viewers and listeners, is, of course, the Mike Cannon-Brookes discussion around having his own personal plane. We talked about it last week.
Yeah.
I think we all struggle with that reconciliation of the good bits we do and the bad bits, and you end up with those 2 shoulders with the angels and the devils on them.
Yeah.
Do you sit down and do an accountancy of yourself, or how do you manage that particular thing, or are you telling yourself little lies?
No, I think you've got to be confronting it. I think you've got to be comfortable with it. The whole world is going through a massive journey. I've enormously benefited from humanity's development and progress over the last 250 years. We've just overspent on the environment. Like, We just have. Like, there's absolutely no way you can get around that. And so we've got to go and fix it. It's not saying everything we've ever done before is bad. It's just, let's go make it better. I want to fly around the world. I love travel. It's one of the best things of being, I'm very, very privileged. But I want to do it with sustainable aviation fuel. Like, there's no reason I can't. Just go make better products. So I think it's confronting them, being honest about it, but then I think there's the tough question around, are you prepared to make some sacrifices? So the Ocean Impact Organisation in Australia, they have this really simple thing, three for the sea. Pick up 3 bits of plastic every day so they don't go into the ocean. And it's just such a simple term, and I will walk around with anyone and I'll pick up bits of plastic. And like, that's a little action I take, and I think if the world took 1 trillion positive actions in the next 10 years, we'd solve it.
I love doing that. And there's actually an artist whose name I can't remember right now who's turned that into artworks.
Oh, wow.
All the Flotsam created these new works out of it. I was going to get to Murray, but I want to jump back
Simon. Meander. Come on, I know you want to.
Well, going to Silicon Valley, you sort of said it wasn't what you expected, which was going to be my question.
Yeah.
But I want to drill down into that thing of money and happiness, because I think that's a really important one, because one of the richest men in the world strikes me as incredibly miserable in the process at the moment. And so how do we manage those two sides of that equation? Because wealth is normally equated with success and then equated with happiness.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. Like, I'm not the wealthiest in the world, and I'm not the poorest. I know certainly there's a level at which it's very difficult to survive in the world. Money allows you to buy health and education and food. Like, I think there's an absolute baseline. But I was really struck very early in my career that wealth did not equate to happiness, and somebody gave me the activity of thinking to your deathbed, even though it sounds a bit morose, like to be like, hey, what are you thinking on your deathbed? And you're like, man, my kids hated me, I got divorced 4 times, I had no friends, but you know what? $100 million, God, what a great life. So that was a big moment for me. I've always kept that in my mind, of like making decisions which are about purpose and impact and living a good life. But balance is good. Like, it's really, really hard. Running Climate Side for 3 years on some government funding and sponsorship is like incredibly hard. Like, it's had a huge impact on my family, like really, really massive. It would have been much easier to stay doing the management consulting I was doing and earn lots of money, but it wasn't the right thing to do. So I know everyone's got to pick their own, make their own choices in life at where they want to go, but there's absolutely false expectation that money's going to solve all your problems and bring lots of joy.
I'm just going to quickly pick up finally on that particular issue. The decisions you make around being entrepreneurial, creating community, everything else, and the cost to family, because I think that's one of the things that founders also have to grapple with. We've talked about it on this show. How did you reconcile that in your mind?
Well, it was really different for me. Like, 2008, didn't have kids, and Phil and I in 2012 were having a talk about where we take the business, and it was like, I think we need a single CEO to give it the purpose and to take it forward, and we thought for a bit it was going to be me, but my wife was like 7 months pregnant. I was like, I don't want to be. I know what it takes to be a really good CEO. Like, and I said no to it, and Phil was an incredible, good choice, and he drove the business brilliantly, but. There's going to be a sacrifice to be made. It's the same thing I think around carbon pricing. There is a price to carbon. Who's paying it? It's right now the environment's paying it, not humans, or the future generations are paying it. So there's a price to be paid for being the CEO of a founder and working on a business for 10, 15 years. And that could be your health, it could be your relationships with your loved ones, it could be all those things. So, but there's also a price to be paid for sitting in a boring ass corporate job in a cubicle and sitting there for 40 years going, I've just been typing numbers in the screen and making rich people richer. That's also a cost. So choice of cost is, it's tough. But my big thing is have as many great conversations as you can. And one thing that really massively helped me around diversity, equity, inclusion was about 7 years ago now, I was writing a book on for my daughters and other young women to encourage them into STEM.
She's building a robot.
She's building a robot, and I interviewed like 30 women, including Julie Trell, and they just told me their stories, and it just gave me this. It wasn't the reason for doing it, but just gave me this incredible connection and understanding, which I was at like 0.5% before that. So, have a conversation with people who have lived different lives. It'll help you make better choices along your journey.
We unfortunately have run out of time, but it's been great to have you, and we will be back very shortly with our next guest, Julie Trell.
Thanks, team.
Thanks, Mick. Welcome back to Startup 360 and our 10X, 10 quick fire questions. Today with Julie Trell from Playful Purpose, one of the most fun people I know in the Australian startup ecosystem. And because she loves a sparkle, she hasn't got one on today. I call her Tina Sparkles. But Julie, yes,
I did bring my magic wand.
Your magic wand. Welcome. Great to have you here. Tell us first of all about Playful Purpose.
Playful Purpose is an agency, and I work with adults, reminding them how to play again, where it drives communication, collaboration, and even better business results, as well as reminding what it's like to, when you play, it lowers the stakes, so it's easier to take more risks, try new things, be more creative. And I facilitate workshops with startups, accelerators, corporates to help address challenges they have or gaps that are focused on human skills. So not the soft skills, human skills. And you mentioned something about AI and technology. I like to say I work in the other AI space, which is applied improv.
I did read that when I was Googling you. I also want to, this is not one of the 10X questions, but can you tell us about the wand?
The wand. Yeah, so when I coach founders, when I'm coaching women or mentoring them, I explain that we're on a room, like usually it's multiple people, we're in a room, and I say, look, I am Glinda the Good Witch. I am just here to ask questions because you are all Dorothy. You have the ruby slippers on, you have your answers. So I am here to ask questions.
Have you watched the Wicked movie?
Not yet.
Oh,
not yet. But
I was going to ask, like, what do you think of her new wand design?
Oh, I have to go watch it. I was just in a play and played the role of Glinda with a singing line, but I haven't seen the movie yet. I've read the book.
It's very fun.
You could have answered my first question. Should we do 10X?
Sorry. Yeah, okay, let's do 10X.
But I'm going to pitch it again in a slightly different way. The purpose of play. I mean, startups, we're in grind. We've got to get the job done. It's really important. I haven't got time to waste. Why should I be mucking around?
Yeah. Well, mucking around, playing. When you're playing, what's the mind frame that you're in? So I'm asking a lot of questions here. When you're playing, and playing can be everything from playing cards with a partner, or Monopoly with your kids, or surfing, or walking outside, or making flowers out of toilet paper rolls. This is all kinds of play, and you lose track of time. You get into flow. Your mind is open to think of new things that you wouldn't normally think of. So play isn't just an extra, let's have fun. You know, if you have fun in my workshop, that's on you, and thank you very much. But I really try and get you to stretch the play muscle and a mindset of what happens when you play and how you can tap into bigger, better, more innovation.
What's your favorite way to play, personally?
It's a good question, because that I always ask.
You should have been prepared.
I am
That's the most
prepared
obvious
for
question.
this. I'm an arts and crafts kind of person.
Okay.
I used to be a camp counselor, so I have made flowers out of toilet paper rolls. Who gives a crap, toilet paper rolls? And I like to be creative. My place is always a mess, and what can I make out of these kind of things? I like to cook, make messes in the kitchen with the recipes, and bringing people together to play games, and also using improv games. That's my thing.
See, I'm so tempted right now to run out and grab a couple of dunny rolls and make her do it for us.
Let's do it. I need a glue gun as well.
Oh,
Hot wax
okay.
gun. That's the fun part.
You can't do an origami dunny roll?
Haven't you learned yet? But challenge accepted.
We can work on it. Right, okay. Now, your Jewish American heritage came to Australia. Your culture and your heritage has been an important part of your storytelling over the years. Fantastic blog on Medium where you talk about it. But I want to ask, from that perspective, coming to Australia from the East Coast of the US, what was it that struck you about how we do things here? Because I know you still feel it to this day.
Yeah. Well, East Coast US, West Coast US, East Coast Australia. I just finding community and connection. So it comes down to the people. And I have found that there's a different appreciation and love of risk and willingness to take risk, which is a little bit lower here. I find working with, I'm learning more when I'm doing facilitating with Australians and researchers and startups. There's a different amount of response when I'm speaking. Like right now, I'm using all my hands and my arms, and I need that when I'm teaching or facilitating. So I find that a little bit of less of that. But also the willingness to try things. And this was when I came down and worked at Telstra with Mira D, and I said, I'm going to come down and play is going to be me. And I was one of the executive offsites that we had with my team. We told them we're going to play, and they're all like, they didn't say anything, they didn't say no. And then when we did, I could see their eyes rolling in the back of their head though. But the games that we did play were purposeful. We're like, this will help you get out of your funk and work with customers and having the hard conversations. And after we played some of these games, these men, they were mostly men, older men that had been at Telstra forever. They're like, oh my God, I need you to come to my team and we need to play more. So that's part of it. I didn't answer the Jewish cultural part of that. I don't,
I think, the interesting part there is we think of ourselves as very easygoing, happy-go-lucky, but the sense is that it's not there from you.
It depends who I'm meeting and where I'm at. Finding the connection and the community. I'm where I do have some Judaica on me, and it's a chai, which is the Hebrew for life. And when I run into someone else that sees it, it's kind of like the secret code and an automatic connection. Oh, Shabbat Shalom, I see your chai, and then we can drop in and have this playful conversation and an immediate connection. So for me, it's connection that we find so much connection when we're playing.
Cool.
Very fun. So improv is famously used in theatre and comedy. Do you have a favourite comedian?
Do I have anyone that can get up on stage and just make stuff up on the fly? So I'm just thinking Ben Schwartz is a great one. Anyone that shows up and does Thank God You're Here. So I really love a lot of these, Australian shows. I think Have You Been Paying Attention? It has a lot about that, as well as Taskmasters. So anyone, like a lot of those from the Working Dog group, can get up and do those and make stuff up out of nothing.
They are really
good
fun.
recommendations.
Dying to be a walk-on for Utopia. I know it's scripted, but having worked at Telstra, worked at Salesforce Foundation.
You're like, I don't need a script.
I don't need a script. I just want to be in the background and play with them.
Which brings me to my question around the Murudi stuff. The corporate thing, you alluded to it before. Is there a different sort of mindset when it comes to play in a smaller business and startups? Because, there are supposed to be beanbags and ping pong tables and a fridge full of booze and all of those things compared to sort of the button down corporate mindset. And do you have that smashed out of you the further you get up the ladder?
Possibly. However, I came down here without the curse of knowledge of the culture of Telstra, and that worked in my favor. I grew up at Salesforce. There were 150 employees when I was there, and there was a big willingness to try things and risk. And so I didn't know any better. So I was like, we're just going to do this. And I was also very lucky because where Miro D offices were in Sydney was very separate from the corporate side. And again, I came with my play mindset. And we did have big cubes, and it looked like a kindergarten office space. And I came in and I changed all the conference rooms to names of games. We had the playroom, and that encouraged the founders to play. Now, play also means being adaptable, being creative, being curious. These are the things that you need to raise money, talk to customers, hire new employees. I had two founders they were there at 2 a.m. or whatever, and they had so much fun. They would text me, look, they built this big, huge chair. It looks like a throne out of all these cubes that you sit on. It's the throne of games. And I was like, I just loved it. Some people were like, why were you there at 2 a.m. and why were you playing? I was like, that said to me that they were letting go. They were thinking, they were being creative. The other thing that we did was I had one room that was the Lego room, where we had Lego pieces.
You're ahead of your time on that front from where Lego is now.
Possibly. Or, I think they were ahead, than I had experienced it. But it was a chance to, we used the room to help to interview and screen future founders to be part of Miro D. So it was a room, number one, if you were like having a night, a blowout, like go in and just play and use your fingers and be creative.
It's like being in timeout.
Yeah, you put yourself in timeout. But what we did for Miro D for part of the intake, when they came to us, we asked them, the two founders or whoever was there, we said, okay, you have 3 minutes, pick 7 blocks, make a duck. There's no wrong answer. So we watched how they thought and what kind of pressure they were under and how creative they were. Again, no wrong answers. And then we said, what will the world look like with your company in it in 5 years? And so the two founders had to create a playground or some sort of a scene. We watched how they worked together. We watched how they were thinking. And it was really insightful for us versus the one-on-one conversations, because people show up in different ways. And play, you can, you learn, you can learn more about a person in an hour of play than a year of conversation.
That is very deep. Very good. Yeah. You kind of maybe have already answered this, but I was going to ask you if you had a very memorable workshop situation or something like that where someone has surprised you with either improv that they've done or they've really come out of their shell and totally transformed.
Yeah, so I worked with CSIRO and their On Accelerate program. And this was in Canberra, and I do 2 things that are tiny little things, but they stick in my mind. I do a sort of a listening meditation, but I don't want to call it meditation. It was just paying attention, because in order to play and to say yes and, you need to listen and really, really pay attention actively and use all of your senses, not just listening. So I do this little meditation where people are tapping into all their senses, and I just remember one of the founders or participants could smell the carpet. And I found that to be really, I'm like, oh my, you really tapped into all your senses. And then a couple months later, I ran into one of the founders, and they came up to me and they said, I just want to thank you. Because of your workshop, our company is more productive and happier just by using the muscles, the little practice of saying yes and what I like about that. So that was very rewarding.
I thought you were going to say they got rid of the carpet.
It actually had black mold in it.
Yeah, or it smelled like an RSL. But gaming room. But I want to ask you about where you are now and all your experience and your play and the stories and those moments. What would you tell Julie of 30 years ago about the world?
Keep playing. Just keep playing. And what was it? A quote that I read today, Amanda Stevens, I just want to throw this one out here again, is don't confuse someone else's uncertainty with your capability. So trying to conform to other people where you have to sit in a box and play might not be in there, but there's other ways to define play and how to show up and be creative and thoughtful and use those terms. So continue to play. It might not fit in a box. Don't worry about not fitting in a box. Don't fit in a box. Color outside the lines.
Get messy.
Get messy.
Yeah. Could you briefly explain for any listeners who don't know what yes and is?
Yeah.
And then can you tell me, if you could only pick one, would you say yes and to every request that ever comes your way? Or would you only have other people say yes and to you?
Oh, I love this question. Such a good question. Ooh. What was the first one?
Explain yes and.
Yes and. Okay, so one of the first main principles of improv is saying yes and. And what that means is, so improvisers are the ones that can get up on stage, they ask the audience for give me a suggestion of a place in a relationship, and then they get up there and they make a scene without a script. And the rule is, what yes and means is, if your partner is up there on the scene and makes an offer, something like, isn't it cold up here on the top of the mountain? Second player has to say, oh my God, yes, it is so cold, and I wish I had some hot cocoa. So it's accepting what is offered. Yes doesn't always mean that you agree. I just want to put that out there. It doesn't always mean you agree, but you're accepting what's in there. Now, if the second person said, no, we're not on the top of the mountain, we're on a beach drinking a margarita, that scene is cooked. You cannot do that. So when you're saying yes and, you're listening to what someone says and you're adding to it. And for me, that's so important. So I'm having trouble with the second part of the question, but I wanted to add that in, that yes doesn't always mean you agree. Being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they're almost indistinguishable. So when I hear someone yes-anding me, and it doesn't even have to be the exact words yes and, but I'm hearing what they're saying, they hear what I have to say, they added to it, I feel heard and loved, and I can continue. So again, I like the second part of that question. I would love people to yes and me and having that energy, because I'll feel heard and loved. And again, yes and doesn't always mean that you agree. you're hearing that person and accepting what they had to say.
Great explanation of why you picked it as well. Because I went, when I was like thinking of this question, I went the other way and was like, people could take advantage of me if I could only ever say yes.
It creates adventure too. I remember Julie doing it at the National AI Centre's Accelerator program where everyone got up on stage and the storytelling was around yes and. It sends you off in directions you weren't expecting to go. And so I think the fun part of that is the adventure that it creates, because in hearing someone, and I love the idea that being heard is close to being loved. I think we all want that. And there are moments where you feel very lonely and kind of
No one understands
anxious
me.
about not being heard.
And the
So
opposite of that is ever
powerful.
been, people say yes, but that's as much as nobody hears what's happening before the but. So when you're saying
Yeah.
yes, but, that's also blocking. And I have changed my writing in my emails. I'll say yes and versus that doesn't mean someone is always taking advantage of you. It's another workshop to understand how to create those boundaries, but you're getting into flow. And I love what you just said about where you'll end up. You wouldn't be expected.
Not to be confused with the great Australian expression, yeah, nah.
Yeah.
Did you struggle with that when you came here?
Yeah, no, not really. Yeah, nah.
Define risk. What is risk to Julie?
Define risk. Personal risk can be like getting out there and looking silly and stupid. That's a big risk. People don't want it because someone's going to make fun of me. Someone's going to cut me down. The old tall poppy syndrome. So that is one thing of a risk. Saying something out loud that someone is not going to accept. So that's the personal beginning type of risk that I like to focus on. So people aren't afraid to have those conversations in meetings.
Have you been counting?
I've got one left.
Yeah, great. Well, let's do it. Bring it home.
It's the party question.
The party question.
Which I know you're excited for.
Yes.
We're finishing with a party.
So I wanted to ask your most memorable party that you've ever attended.
Oh, that I've ever attended. See, I just threw one on Sunday.
Well, you can give us a hosting tip as well.
Now you tell us.
Yeah.
Yeah, where were we?
Yeah, I know. Well, I'll throw it again because why I threw it was I am playing a game with UCID MBA and MBA students, and we're playing Werewolf. Have you ever played Werewolf or Mafia? It's a social deduction game, and we're using it in concept of how to show up in business. So I wanted to practice facilitating, and I brought people from my world that didn't know each other. So I love going to parties where I don't know anyone. I'll answer that. I also love getting people to meet each other and introduce. Like, I'm a human API, so I love seeing that. So that was a lot of fun. And what was hard, I learned a lot being the facilitator for this game, was there were people that said that they were uncomfortable, that they felt unsafe. And as an empath, my empathy was an empathy overload. And that's where the growth happens. So I have to be comfortable with people having it. And it was a safe space. They were my friends. So that's what I learned hosting this party and then watching everyone becoming friends and meeting one another. And everyone made their own character and name. So I was doing this at South Start with Courtney Blackman, a.k.a. Nectarine. We were asking people, what's another name you would have if you couldn't have your name and why? So we saw the connections with people playing in their games, playing games with their name and who they were. But I also before I forget also, because you were talking about the food you have at a party, I have the most spectacular hot pepper artichoke dip that always gets rave reviews, and I make that every time. So that's the food part and the people connecting part.
Very nice.
I didn't answer your question.
We all need to take turns hosting a party and just...
Yeah.
And we also need to get the hot anchovy.
Hot artichoke.
Hot artichoke. Yeah.
Pepper dip.
Can I put anchovies in that?
If you want to, yes. And let me know how it goes.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I want the recipe, and I'm going to put it in the story for
Awesome.
Startup 360 this week.
Fantastic.
Julie Trell, you amazingly playful person. Thank you so much for joining us
Thank
on
you so
Startup
much.
360.
Thank you for having me. It was great to meet you.
Yes. And I'd love to meet you again.
Yes, and we'll have a werewolf party, and you two are on top of my list.
We're going to do a whole lot of parties. I reckon we can go to Party 360 after this. Is
Yeah.
the next
Oh,
series.
yeah, let's do it. Yes, and that's a big yes.
All right. Yes.
Yes, and you need a
And more.
pinata.
All right, we do have to wrap though. Thank you, Kayla. Thank you, Julie. Thank you to Mick as well. This show is a Pinstripe Media production, produced and edited today by James Vass.
Got it.
James Vass. Thank you, Matt. Hi. Hope you're having a great time in Melbourne. Thanks to Ella. I was going to say thanks to James Vass, but thank you to James
Thank you to
and Matt.
everyone.
Thank you.
And all the entire team at
Yeah.
Pinstripe. They are amazing every week. And also to Vanda for their support. Subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Don't forget to read startupdaily.net. I did mention Kaza in a piece about Mark Zuckerberg this week, so have a look at that. That was kind of like the Australian version of Napstar back in its day. Of course, we'll see you next Friday. Have a great week, Kayla. And we'll see you for a party soon, Julie. Bye for now.